All right. Welcome, everyone. In lieu of Randy running the meeting today, he's feeling a little under the weather. The flu caught him. I'm going to be moderating and running the slideshow and keeping an eye on the chat and anything you guys need. So don't hesitate to put a message in the chat if you need something. So welcome. This is the winter fireside chat. And we are lucky to have William Bill T. Anderson to present. He is retired from the Department of Defense in 2005 after over 40 years of civilian and military service, to include serving at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe in Belgium from 1987 to 2005. I'm betting his Flemish is better than mine, or at least his French. He attended Hampton-Sydney College and the American University. He received his JD from Washington and Lee University Law School, an MA in National Security Study from Georgetown University, and is a graduate of the National War College. A disabled veteran and colonel retired, he served on the adjunct faculty, College of Distance Education and Training, Command and Staff College Program, Marine Corps University at Quantico, Virginia from 2009 to 2017. He is the author of The Bravest Deeds of Men, a battlefield guide for Belleau Wood, and numerous articles on the Marine Corps and German units facing the Marines in World War I. So in just a minute, I'm going to turn it over to him for his presentation. Um, if you'll make sure that you are muted so that any background noise from your standpoint won't sort of bleed through to the whole group. And if you have questions that you want to remember for later, you can put those in the chat group, or maintain a list on your own, and we'll try to get to questions at the end. Does anybody have any questions? All right. We'll turn it over to Bill.
Hey, Shelley, before I start,
Sure.
do you see my cursor on the slide?
I do not, but I can share it. Will you want me to share the program with you?
Yeah, because I wanted to be able to use the cursor to
Yeah.
show some things on some maps.
Let's see if does that give you access to it? That's my cursor
That's your cursor, okay.
right here. Um, Let me look at, hmm. I
Sure,
am
we should
not
have figured that out
seeing.
before.
Now,
I
the
just,
other option is you can run it from your side if you want to do that.
yeah. How do I, yeah, how do you want me to do that? I'll share.
What you will do is you'll share your screen with the up at the should be at the bottom. It'll say share option. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stop sharing mine. Okay. There you go.
Can you do, are we in?
You are in and you
All right.
are, well, it looks like we can both do that. That's weird. I
Okay.
don't know. I don't know if we can both do it or not, but we'll see.
All right. Well, can you see my cursor?
I can. Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, thank you. Welcome, everybody. We're going to spend some time talking about Belleau Wood, which is an important battle uh, in American military history as well as in World War I history. I'm going to look at it from the standpoint of its influence on the war and how it has been remembered. Next slide, or I guess I can do that. Oops. Yeah. Um, Okay, the kind of plan of action here, plan of attack is look at it from a strategic overview, what was going on at the time, the battle itself, kind of run through the battle fairly quickly if possible, and then talk about the significance of Belleau Wood. In the winter of 1918, um, the Western Front was stagnated in the trench warfare. Russia was out of the war after the revolution. The Germans were able to move at least probably 1 million troops to the Western Front, and both sides, Allies and the Germans, were tired. Population was drained. Was just a pretty miserable state of affairs. By June 1917, after the United States declared war, the U.S. started arriving, sending troops, 239,000 in France by March of 1918. And as a result, General Ludendorff felt it was important to try to end the war on the best terms available for Germany. So he came up with this idea of the 5 offenses from March to July 1918, and they were designed to attack the British and then the French, and then strike the seam between the two. Um, and what we're going to be looking at is the third offensive, the Aisne-Marne offensive, and that began on the 27th of May, 1918, across the Chemin des Dames in France. Caught the French completely by surprise. There were some British units that were supposedly on, rest and recuperation in a quiet sector, and they got overrun. Germans drive to the Marne, which is about 30 miles from Paris. The French were in a panic, and they started to abandon the government in Paris. And by the 30th of May, the Germans had advanced 40 miles, crossed 3 rivers, captured 50,000 prisoners, 800 guns, and they established a salient with the tip resting northwest of Chateau Thierry. As some of you are aware, the commander of the American Expeditionary Force, General Pershing, was adamant that he wanted the American units, the Army, to fight as an American Army. And he wasn't interested in piecemealing out American divisions to fill in the gaps in the British or with the French or the British units. And so, he was just very stubborn about it. However, because of the seriousness of the situation there in May, he relented and offered up American divisions to serve with the French Sixth Army. If we can look at the map here, this is a map from the German archives, shows the German offensive, and this is part of the salient, the tip of the salient that the German Fourth Reserve Corps had punched through the French countryside, driving the French units before it. The 237th Division is the one that we spend more time talking about tonight because it was the one that was centered on the little village of Belleau here, and then we're able to establish positions in a place called Belleau Wood. And one of their purposes was to drive to the Paris-Metz highway, which is a main line of communication along the entire French army's situation there, going from east to west. How do I get rid of that? Whoops. Okay, so in terms of the situation with the Second Division, that was made up of the 2 brigades on the 1st of June. They were sent from Paris along the Paris-Metz highway towards Chateau Thierry. Excuse me. The deployment was pretty much of a mess because they had originally been ordered to move north of Paris to support the 1st Division at Cantigny. And then they had to reverse course, go back down the road to Paris and go west on the Paris highway there. And so the units were all spread out and the confusion reigned. Colonel Catlin, who was the 6th Marine Regimental Commander, commented in his memoir that I was a regimental commander without a regiment. I didn't know where the regiment was. As they go into the line there along the Paris-Metz Highway toward Chateau Thierry, the 4th Brigade, which was made up of the Marine regiments, went to the left, north of the highway, and the 3rd Brigade, the Army 9th Infantry and 23rd Infantry, went to the south to tie in with the 3rd Division. It was coming up from the south to support and defend Chateau Thierry. As a result, the Marine deployment was centered on Lucy-le-Bocage, the village that was facing Belleau Wood. And here's another example of the salient and the deployment of the 2nd Division and the 3rd Division in response to that 4th Reserve Corps, the German 4th Reserve Corps, which was called Corps Kanta after the commander, Lieutenant General Kanta. Excuse me, now I got something from Randy. It looks like coming down with something already. The opposing forces, we have to look at the difference between the two units, the various units. In terms of the Marine Brigade, no existing brigade structure prior to 1917. There were 4 Marine regiments spread out around the world. A regiment in the Philippines, a regiment in the Caribbean, a regiment on the West Coast, a regiment on the East Coast. But now we're going to be sending Marines to France, so they had to create new regiments. The fifth regiment was the first one organized, and that was basically one that was made up of collection of Marines from various posts and stations around the world. Just the word went out. Everybody basically who wasn't needed, where they were, needs to arrive at Quantico, where they were forming up at Quantico, that was just recently created, and they got the 5th Marine Regiment together and shipped to France in June of 1917. The 6th Regiment started to arrive once the 5th Marine Regiment left in July, but as a result of the fact that it was basically, being created out of whole cloth, it wasn't in France really as a complete regiment until February of 1918. And as a result, the brigade wasn't created until the 10th of February, 1918. So what was the 4th Marine Brigade doing in that winter of 1918? Well, they were training in trench warfare. The Allies, didn't think that the Americans knew anything about fighting. So if you're going to be fighting in Europe, you're going to be fighting in trenches. They were sent to Verdun in March through May of 1918 to get exposed to the trench warfare. But then, as I said, it was reassigned to the French Sixth Army on the 31st of May, and it was told to with the division to get to Chateau Thierry as part of that the 21st French Corps. Now, the brigade had a Marine brigade commander, Brigadier General Doyen, who went to France, but he became ill in the winter of 1917, 1918, and was diagnosed, unfortunately, with lung cancer that eventually took his life in September, October. And they needed another brigadier general. Well, the Marine Corps didn't have one, really that was able to go there at the time. So Pershing appointed his chief of staff, James Harbord, to be the brigade commander. Interesting choice. The guy was an administrator. He had no combat experience, but they were going to make him a brigade commander going into combat. He became the 2nd Division commander on the 14th July, just before Soissons. And then in August, he became Pershing's chief of services of supply, which probably was a more important job for him, and more for which he was particularly qualified. And apparently he did a superb job. Um, on the other side, we have this 237th Infantry Division. It was activated in 1917 with um, the collection of men coming from, again, from the Eastern Front, um, moving into France. They had spent time this summer in Russia fighting, especially during the Kerensky offensive, and the division was key in the German or the Allied counterattack in July that really broke the back of the Russian army in the southern front. The 461st Regiment occupied Belleau Wood on the 3rd of June. That's the regiment with which we will be concerned. The important thing about that is that the commander was Major Joseph Bischoff, and he is quite a remarkable gentleman. He had spent 8 years in the Schutztruppe in Africa in the colonial wars. He'd been a combat leader since 1914, and he had 5 decorations for valor before Belleau Wood. He got 2 in Africa, and then 3 Iron Cross second class, Iron Cross first class, and then a Bavarian award after his regiment served with the Bavarian Division um, in 1916. Excuse me. He was a remarkable soldier, and we'll see that he knew what he was doing. We'll look at it, the battle from 3 phases in June of 1918, the 1st through the 9th, 10th through the 17th, and the 18th through the 26th. Now, of course, this is an artificial construct, but because everything was fluid and every going on all at the same time in various different locations. But we'll try to make this move smoothly, so we'll understand what really transpired. The Marines move, and they're centered, as I said, around this village called Lucy-le-Bocage, which is right in front of Belleau Wood. The 6th Regiment went to the right, and the 5th Regiment went to the left. And they were replacing French units that were falling back. Now, there's always been kind of the tale that the French were withdrawing, retreating in some kind of disgraceful, mass. And in reality, it was a fighting withdrawal. They've been fighting, the Germans have been fighting the French all the way from the Chemin des Dames all the way here to Belleau Wood, and um, in some ways that the French distinguished themselves, and that by the time that the Germans got here, they really reached their culminating point in term, as Clausewitz talks about an attacking force reaches to a particular point to where it's exhausted, basically. And I think that's what happened with the Germans here at Belleau Wood. The 5th Marines go to around a place called Lemaire's Farm. In this area here, the 6th Marines are over here. They're aggressive patrolling along the lines here as we're deploying. The Marines deployed, as I mentioned earlier, without any of their, a lot of their support. The artillery was way back down the highway. They hadn't had a hot meal in several days. Um, but the defense stiffens here, a function of new troops reaching at the same time that the Germans arrived at their culminating point, which is a bad combination for the Germans. At Lemaire's Farm is the first place where we see Marines distinguish themselves. As part of the kind of the folklore of the battle, there's the story of Captain Lloyd Williams, who was the company commander at Lemaire's Farm, and a French officer supposedly had come up to him and said, well, you got to fall back. It's the Germans. The Germans are coming. You got to fall back. And Captain Williams is supposedly have replied, "Retreat hell, we just got here." And this is one of those famous Marine Corps sayings that comes from the First World War. Um, there isn't really any witnesses to this particular fact. However, there's a document in the Marine Corps archives, which is a message from the company commander, the adjutant, the company XO, I guess, to the battalion, saying that they have met, they have exchanged positions, or they've been relieved, or the French have been relieved. They'd relieved the French there in the positions there at Lemaire's farm, but the French commanders has told them that they needed to withdraw. And Captain Williams has said that he wasn't going to withdraw, and he'll stay there. Oh, and by the way, please ask the artillery units not to adjust their fires, because we're staying up forward, which makes a lot of sense if the artillery thinks you're withdrawing and you're not, and then they pound that area with artillery fire. It could be an unfortunate incident. Now the Germans began to attack Lemaire's farm, and they ran into sustained rifle fire from the Marines around the farm, and were repulsed. Um, at the same time, on the other end of the front, on the eastern side of the brigade sector, the 461st Regiment now is occupying Belleau Wood, and that's going to be Major Bischoff's assignment. His regiment is assigned the responsibility of entering Belleau Wood and defending it. The first awards for valor are earned by Marines and the Second Engineers, the Army Second Engineers, who supported the Marines by repelling those German attacks at Lemaire's farm. Several Distinguished Service Crosses come out of that fight around Lemaire's farm. Both sides disengaged on the 5th of June, and prepare for an offensive on the 6th of June. It's interesting that they both picked the 6th of June. Unfortunately for the Germans, the Second Division jumped the gun and got on the offensive first. But before that, several problems faced the Marines as they were thinking about transitioning to the offense from being on the defense. One, as I mentioned, disorganized deployment without their full complement. They didn't have all their machine guns up, for example, in addition to the artillery and the supply wagons. They really didn't have any intelligence as to the enemy strength or position, remembering that the Germans were on the offensive. They were moving forward, and they hadn't really been established in any positions anywhere for anybody to go and really take a good look at. Also, because they'd been moving forward, the brigade didn't have any proper maps. One of the memoirs talks about when the company commander came back from the battalion, he had a piece of paper he'd scribbled a map on that he had copied from the map the battalion commander had. And of course, then the lieutenants, the platoon commanders, they're doing the same thing. So you really didn't have a good idea of actually where you were going. The other thing was, of course, they were fresh troops facing units with battle-tested leaders. The Marines had never really fought a campaign like this before. There were some combat experienced Marines, some of the officers and the senior non-commissioned officers, but they'd fought, in the Boxer Rebellion, the Philippine War, and they hadn't faced European armies in a battlefield like Belleau Wood. Oops, I went to I hit the wrong button. Sorry about that. Okay, so what could we expect in Belleau Wood then? Well, it's it's about 2 square kilometers. 500, give or take 500 acres. Rough, rocky, boulder strewn. It's not flat. It's hilly. There's flat areas going into it. The terrain moves uh, up from the flat agrarian fields into the woods, very thick and overgrown, ideal for machine guns in the defense. And guess what? Major Bischoff knew what he was doing. So here's an example of a map from the German archives that were translated in the 1920s by the War Department. And this is a map that Major Bischoff had included in a message he'd sent back to the brigade. And one thing about I have to compliment the Germans in the archives when they sent a sit rep, daily sit rep, they always included a map of here's the situation of the troops of the unit, with the terrain. So here we have um, the third battalion of his regiment with the four companies arrayed around the edges of Belleau Wood. These little spots right here are outposts, and this is a machine gun nest with one NCO and 6 men. Okay, so this is the forward edge of Belleau Wood of the woods right here. Um, Up here in the woods here is the hunting lodge pictured to the right, which is a leftover from the old chateau that was in Belleau and the noble family that lived there. And Belleau Wood was a hunting preserve, and they used to spend their evenings in what they called the hunting lodge. Phase one. Okay, so General Harbord issues a brigade order number 1 for the offensive operations on the 5th of June at 2225. And he says that he wanted to have at 0345 on the 6th, the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines to attack and seize Hill 142, and 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines to advance on its right. The regiment, now recognizing that this is the brigade, has to send a message to the regiment and the regiment down to the battalion. And again, the Marines had never done this before. The regiment issues an order at 0035 on the 6th of June. And then Major Turrell, the battalion commander, he receives the order with only 2 companies in place at about 0300. And he doesn't have any machine guns. So what does he do? Of course, he's a Marine. He attacks when ordered. And this is a map from my battlefield guide. So you have what he had was 2 companies, and Hill 142, referred to as Hill 142, is really not a hill. Back up in this area, right where the battalion map symbol is a geographic point on the French map that was 142, and they did that as a geographical reference point, and it's not the highest point in terrain like we would refer to it, but it's just been recalled here. Well, here it is. Here's one. It's referred to as Hill 142 because that's what the map indicated, so people knew where the attack was going to happen. And actually, they're attacking down a finger that runs down to the creek bed here. Anyway, so the 2 companies take off. One company, the 49th, goes and through the German outposts here, actually attacks up onto the road near the village of Torcy. They realize they're too far, so they turn around and they have to come back. Now, they did pretty well going out, but coming back, they took a lot of casualties because they ran into the German units that had now turned to withdraw, and then were actually meeting the Marines back in this area here, and they were, continued to fight. The 67th Company on the other side, they attacked down the Finger, and it's this wide open area of fields here, and were through the punched their hole, punched the hole through the German position, drove them back, and without thinking about it, they opened themselves up to counterattacks from two companies of the 25th Jaeger Battalion that was attached to the 197th Division on the Marine left flank. And they were in the 7th Saxon Jaeger Regiment. So the 67th Company suffered terrible casualties in the fields here, and the 49th Company suffered terrible casualties here and got back and able to establish a position at the edge of the Finger and protected themselves for further counterattacks, and the limited, were limited by this by the German force that was now up on the road there to the north. So once the report came back to General Harbor that the battle at 142 was successful, and there wasn't any indication in the original reports about the terrible casualties, that he decided he was going to now attack in the Belleau Wood, and that was the second phase. The 3rd Battalion was going to attack directly across the open fields into Belleau Wood and this hill 169, and the 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines, was going to attack along the road from Lucy-le-Bocage to the village of Baresh and go into the woods here and then turn north. And there was going to be some kind of a meeting engagement between the two battalions. Of course, what they didn't realize was that this whole area was covered by machine guns in this wide open field. The 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines was decimated. The 3 companies on the left flank actually had to withdraw. The 4th Company was able to move into the wood because they took advantage of an area of defilade, a small area here that was protected them from the machine gun fire. So at the end of that assault, you had 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines no longer existed, and the 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines was now into the edge of the wood. On the right flank was the 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines that was moving toward Baresh, kind of protecting the right flank of the 3rd Battalion. And we'll see what happened next. So as the assault begins, someone stands up, according to correspondent Floyd Gibbons, and yells, "Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever?" Now, it's attributed to First Sergeant Dan Daly of the 73rd Machine Gun Company in the 6th Marine Regiment. And he was quite a character already because, as you notice from the picture here, he has 2 medals of honor. One from the Boxer Rebellion and the Peking Legation, and the other, I think, from Veracruz in the Spanish-American War. He denied saying anything like it, but most people think it probably was him. So what was the result of this first assault on the 6th of June? The attacks were uncoordinated against Belleau Wood. Battalions from different regiments. Colonel Catlin, who was the 6th Regiment commander and was responsible for the attack and commanded the attack, is wounded early outside Lucy-le-Bocage. Therefore, command and control just necessarily broke down. 3-5 was out of the action. 3-6 gains the foothold, and 2-6 is directed to attack into the village of Baresh. The 2nd Battalion, now the 6th Marines, moves into an attack mode going down the hill here, but they're still able to be fired on from the terrain here when the German machine guns firing across the road against them from the flank, and German machine guns up here outside the village of Beresh firing also on them with the main line of resistance for the Germans was this railroad embankment, and they had mine werfers or trench mortars um, effectively struck the Marines going across the field here. Um, so on the 6th of June, what were the casualties? Well, 31 officers, 1,056 men. I mean, you had 6 officers and 222 Marines and sailors. Because you have to remember there were medical corps, Navy medical corps sailors with the Marine Brigade. Um, pretty sad state. How about the Germans in Beresh? The 10th Infantry Division, which was in Beresh, they had 21 killed and wounded 101. And at Belleau Wood and Hill 142, which was the 237th Division, you had 78 killed and 386 killed. And so it turns out that the 6th of June, 1918, was the most catastrophic day in Marine Corps history up to that date. More casualties than in all the battles in its history, all added together on one day. How about phase two? Well, phase two, the 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marine, the 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines are now in Beresh, and the decision is made to do an attack of the 1st Battalion, 6th Marines, because the 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines had been withdrawn because of casualties. The 1st Battalion, 6th Marines attacks into the same area, the southern part of the wood. Now the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines attacks across the open field into Belleau Wood. But of course, they're in a little bit better position because there had been a lot of casualties among the Germans as well. Um, and the Germans are also starting to experience shortages in personnel and an outbreak of influenza that is rapidly moving through the German army. One of the problems that the Germans had was after the 6th of June, the decision was made to relieve Major Bischoff of the responsibility for the entire wood and to move a regiment from another division, the 40th Fusiliers, into that southern part of the wood from a different division. And here's the division boundary. So what happened with the 10th and the 11th, the attack, the 10th from the south and then the 11th from the west, there was poor coordination between the two German divisions, and it allowed the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines to turn with units at the boundary to turn right, looking to link up with the 1st Battalion, 6th Marines, and they ran into the back of the 2nd Battalion, 40th Fusiliers. And so you had the 40th Fusiliers Battalion here was just basically beaten up really bad to the point that it was actually withdrawn. It got out of Belleau Wood. The other flank of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines drove the Bischoff's regiment up into the northern edge of the wood. And the second part was Lieutenant Colonel Wise, who was the battalion commander for the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, when he drove through the woods to the eastern edge, his instructions were to capture the northern edge. And for some reason, he was disoriented, again, recognizing that this was a jumbled, heavily wooded area, that he thought this was the northern edge. So he didn't think it was necessary for him, to protect his left flank because he thought the left flank was over here and he had the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines on his left flank. Excuse me. But of course, that wasn't the case. Major Bischoff counterattacked. Elements from the the 28th Division, the 110th Grenadiers, and another battalion from the Fusiliers. They attacked around, um, and driving the Marines back on themselves, so that late in the day of the 11th, as darkness falls, you have the Marine perimeter now in the kind of the second the bottom half of Belleau Wood. The Germans now control the northern part. So it was decided again, let's didn't attack, didn't succeed. We'll move the first battalion, 6th Marines, and the second battalion, 5th Marines will now attack. And again, they drive the Germans with the effective use of artillery fire. They drive the Germans back into the northern part of the wood. Again, they get to the eastern flank, but this time uh, Lieutenant Colonel Wise is smart enough. He refuses his flank along an area called the big ravine. There's a big ravine here, and he was able to protect himself from, again, Bischoff's battalion up here, as well as continued attacks from the 28th Division around this area where the 1st Battalion, 6th Marines were. Now, the importance of the battle for Baresh that was several days earlier now comes true, because the Marines, now that the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines is in Baresh, they're able to take any unit in the open out here under devastating machine gun fire, so that these counterattacks never really amounted to anything. There was The field for several days was littered with German bodies. 14th of June, the decision was made to relieve the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, because they'd been pretty beaten up as well. So they were going to move the 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines that were going to move to replace the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. Unfortunately, in the open here, the Germans saw them. Even though it happened at night, they were discovered, and there was a terrible artillery barrage from the Germans with high explosive and gas that caught that battalion and basically devastated and destroyed 2 companies. And so when Lieutenant Colonel Holcomb arrives to see Lieutenant Colonel Wise, he only has 2 companies with him. Colonel Wise sends a message back to the brigade saying, I'm not going to leave the position here. I'm going to assimilate the Lieutenant Colonel Holcomb's Marines, because if I did that, the 2 companies are not a large enough force to protect the position. 15th of June, there's more of a consolidation with other units moving in, Marine units moving in, still pressing Major Bischoff's troops in the northern edge of the wood. When the 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines withdraws, that's the one that had been devastated. When they all moved to the rear by the 17th of June, this is a photograph of the 12 officers from that battalion out of the 24 normally, in the battalion complement. The 7th Infantry from the 3rd Division moved into the woods to relieve the Marines, but didn't really accomplish anything. The final attacks were the 7th Infantry withdrew. 3-5 now moves back in, a completely reconstituted battalion from the 6th of June with almost 80% replacements. It moved in, drove into the woods, driving Major Bischoff's men out, to the extent that a new battalion from a new regiment, the 347th, was brought in to try to stem the tide, but they were unsuccessful. They weren't not really a very good combat regiment at all, being kind of a follow-up regiment in the in this kind of the scheme of offensive operations, not really a frontline unit. So that by the 26th, the Marines had pretty much consolidated themselves around the northern part of the wood, and the I hope I'm sorry you can't see this. Anyway, Major Shearer, who was now the battalion commander of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, sends a message back on the 26th. Belleau Wood, now U.S. Marine Corps property entirely. Very famous, another one of those famous lines. Okay, what price glory? The the Marines regiments, the total was 621 killed and 2,468 wounded. I mean, pretty devastating. The 2nd Engineer Regiment, with their a battalion attached to each of the Marine regiments, lost 91 men and wounded 331. What about the Germans? The Germans were pretty beaten up as well, as you can see. The most devastating, of course, was the 237th Division, Major Bischoff's regiment. They lost 322 killed between the 10 days between the 6th and the 16th of June. And the 20th Infantry Division, 28th, they lost 410 killed in 3 days. And that's the 40th Fusilier 2nd Battalion that was pretty much um, obliterated on those attacks of the 10th and the 11th of June. Now, there was some distinguished conduct by Americans for sure. You have Gunnery Sergeant Stockham, Medal of Honor. He died of wounds. He was in the 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines in that devastating gas and artillery attack on the evening of the 14th of June. He was seen carrying casualties back to an aid station in Lucy-le-Bocage. And at some point, he ran across a young Marine who had lost his gas mask in the gas attack and gave him his his gas mask and then carried him to the aid station and where Gunnery Sergeant Stockham collapsed and he succumbed to his wounds about 3 days later from the gas attack. You had Navy dentist Whedon Osborne, who was one of the medical officers with the 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines in the fields outside of Buresh, that was killed. And what was a dentist doing, on the battlefield is kind of an interesting thing. But he went for it anyway, and he was administering to some of the Marines that were wounded in the fields outside of Buresh there, and was killed by an artillery shell. Sorry. This is Lieutenant Orlando Petty, who was a naval surgeon who was working in the regimental aid station, the 6th Marines in Lucy-le-Bocage. Continued to work one particular day when they were subjected to heavy German artillery fire. One shell hit fairly close to the aid station, knocked everybody down. Dr. Petty got back up and continued to work on saving Marines. Was everywhere, all over the place during that artillery barrage, trying to administer to Marines, and was awarded the Medal of Honor. And then Gunnery Sergeant Hoffman and Jansen was in the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines at Hill 142, and led a counterattack against that blunted a German counterattack, and single-handedly killed several German soldiers. His name in the records was Gunnery Sergeant Hoffman in the Marine records. When he received a lot of notoriety about receiving the Medal of Honor, he said, "Well, excuse me, I think I need to tell you something. Um, my name is really Jansen. I enlisted under an assumed name. In fact, I was in the army and I got kicked out of the army. But I liked the military and I wanted to go back. So then that's when I enlisted in the Marine Corps. But my name is really Jansen. So the records kind of have a hyphenated thing there. Now, what about Major Bischoff is kind of an interesting thing because um, he was awarded the German Poulet Mérite of the Prussian, the Imperial Prussian Medal of Honor on the 30th of June, 1918. And it was something that was discovered. I discovered this not that long ago. Um, and then I was able to find in the archives his actually citation where it reads, "It was only thanks to his courage and comprehensive action that he was able to hold the forest with the weakened remnants of his regiment against superior forces. He led his regiment in exemplary manner in different circumstances." Quite a tribute to his efforts as a infantry commander at Belleau Wood. What's the significance? Well, the U.S. support was late due to the panic deployment. The Marine regiment and structure and brigade orders limited coordination between the battalions from different regiments. Major Bischoff was a master use of terrain and the tactical defense. The German tactical doctrine at the time was you don't defeat the enemy at the edge of the battlefield. You let them enter into the battlefield and into an area of your choosing where then you attack them with machine guns, and that's what he did. Marines got into the woods, but then was just as bad in the woods as it was out in the open field. And also, it's interesting that the Germans enjoyed local air superiority, which is something that we really haven't studied, and I'd like to probably take some time looking at that in the future. This is before the American air power had exempted or it started to get together with Brigadier General Billy Mitchell. That was used to great advantage at San Miguel, I believe, couple of months later. And uh, just by luck would have it, the U.S. attacked where the German corps commanders had placed divisional seams, which was always an area for poor coordination between the adjacent units, and it led to the problems for the Germans. Um, Tactical battles, strategic effects. Some thought that the Battle of Mayor's Farm was the Gettysburg of the war. The high tide of the Confederacy, like at the angle at Pickett's Charge. Well, Lemaire's Farm was the same thing for the German army. Uh, it was the closest they ever got to Paris. The Germans were really never on the offensive again after being pushed back at Lemaire's Farm. And it also contributed rather significantly to blunting the German offensive itself and energizing the Allies, which is an interesting thing. Here we have a comment from the 28th Division Commander, General Bohm. He talks about the importance of the German success at Belleau Wood, and it's not so much a question of possession or not possession of this or that village or whatever. It's a question of whether the Anglo-American claim that the American army is the equal or even superior of the German army is to be made good. And I think that's what really is the significance of Belleau Wood, and that's what happened. The Americans had arrived. The Allies never thought the Americans would fight very well, but they did here. They were willing to take casualties, and they bettered the German army for sure. Also, General Ludendorff. I didn't delude myself as the eminence or the strength of the American forces then coming into action. Tremendous superabundance of pent up, untapped nervous energy that we brought into the fray more than balanced the weakness of their allies who were utterly exhausted. And this is on 18th of July before before Soissons. So he's referring to the Belleau Wood for sure. Now, the other thing about, from the Marine Corps perspective, the significant thing about Belleau Wood was this was the first time that Marine marksmanship was really something that people recognized. Um, and here's a comment from Major Adams, the adjutant from the 6th Marines. The French, they couldn't grasp the rifle fire of the men. That men should fire deliberately and use their sights and adjust their range was beyond their experience.
Hmm.
The French thought the purpose of the rifle was to put a bayonet on the end of it and then charge. And they saw guys like Private Fisher here from the 55th Company, the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. He was a sharpshooter. He earned a Civil Star Medal because, and this is documented. He struck six German soldiers at 1,400 yards with his '03 Springfield, and that's darn good shooting. Now, kind of really interesting from kind of a strategic point of view, and that's something that's carried down through the years, is the situation with Floyd Gibbons. He joins the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines in that assault across that wheat field at Belleau Wood, and he's seriously wounded. And the AEF censor, they were censoring stories to delete references to specific units for security reasons, like the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, or whatever. But believing Gibbons was dying from his wounds, he let the dispatch that said "with the Marines" go through without editing. So the precedent was set for subsequent stories about the battle, so that news reached the U.S. that the Marines were fighting and winning the war. Now here's the New York Times from the 7th of June, 1918. Our Marines attack, gain a mile at Filly, resume the drive at night, foe losing heavily. And you think, my God, the Marines are winning the war. And then on the 12th, San Francisco Chronicle, Marines again smash ahead. Foch turns on the foe and wins. I mean, my God, the Marines are winning. Now, what was the significance of those kinds of headlines in terms of inter-service rivalry? As you can imagine, it fostered an enduring warm relationship with the U.S. Army. Guys like Captain Harry S. Truman and 139th Field Artillery. What about the fallback or fallout and the payback? Well, oh my goodness, look, he distinguished himself later. So now you have attempts by the Truman administration to disband the Marine Corps. Now, of course, Marines are convinced it was because he thought the Marines got all the glory in World War One, and the Army played a significant role. And of course, that's tongue in cheek, but maybe that has something to do with that. What about the future of the Marine Corps? Well, as I mentioned, it's a keystone battle of Marine Corps history. Like Iwo Jima, Chosin Reservoir, Belleau Wood. I mean, it's a kind of the triumvirate. The Devil Dog's nickname comes from this period too. It's supposedly the name or the moniker of Teufelhunden given to the Marines by the German soldiers. Now, there's some controversy about that, and there's not a whole lot of evidence in the historical record about that, but it's been around for over 100 years now. The Devil Dog Fountain is in Belleau. The chateau, the stables of the chateau in Belleau have a artesian well, and that's become known as the Devil Dog Fountain. Starting probably back in the 80s, it was discovered by some Marines, including myself. And we started to go there every time we go to Belleau Wood to drink from the fountain. It's kind of the Marine fountain of youth. You're going to get promoted, you're going to get reenlisted, you're going to make a career, whatever. And that's become kind of folklore as well. Regimental traditions were established with the 5th Marines and the 6th Marine regiments. They were both awarded the Croix de Guerre by the French Army commander, so that today, members of those two regiments wear a croix de guerre aiguillette on over their left shoulder in their uniform. And obviously, because of these kinds of traditions, the whole area of Belleau Wood and the village of Belleau have become a pilgrimage site for Marines. You've got to be there at least once. It's on a bucket list. I gotta go to Belleau Wood. Um, it's just been rather interesting how this is all has happened. Um, the other interesting thing I think, uh, the relation between the Navy Medical Corps and the Chaplain Corps, they were really created here at Belleau Wood. The regiments, the battalions had medical detachments made up of a doctor and a dentist and about 18 corpsmen each battalion. The Marines had never had dedicated medical service ever until they went to France in 1918. And this has continued with the tradition of Navy corpsmen and Marine units in combat ever since. The chaplain corps as well. Navy chaplains had never served with Marine units until for the First World War. And at Belleau Wood, they distinguished themselves, going around the battlefield, administering to the fallen. Several, distinguished service crosses were given to Navy chaplains for what they did at Belleau Wood. And then you have a series of World War II leaders that earned valuable experience. It's an island surrounded by a sea of wheat. So you have issues about supplying isolated troops. How do you get water and food to men in a area of Belleau Wood where if you step out during daylight, you're going to be taken under artillery fire by the enemy. Aerial operations. Again, I mentioned that earlier. Of course, command and control. The importance of being able to communicate with units in a tactical situation, and then of course the use of combined arms and the importance of artillery and combined artillery and infantry attacks is something that was really honed, I think, in the First World War. Of particular interest to me is what you see is the men who became commandants of the Marine Corps. Here you have four gentlemen who were at Belleau Wood: Wendell Neville, Thomas Holcomb, Clifton Cates, and Lemuel Shepard.
Hmm.
And if you look at the period from 1929 basically to 1955, the Marine Corps was led by Belleau Wood veterans. Especially the most important guy, I think, is General Holcomb, because from 1936 to 1943, he's the one that really developed the concept of the Fleet Marine Force in support of naval amphibious operations, which was obviously a key part of the victory in the Pacific in World War II. But here you have lieutenants. One was a colonel, a major, battalion commander, and then two lieutenants. In terms of battle-tested leaders, how about Belleau Wood to Iwo Jima? You got General Graves Erskine, who was at Belleau Wood, a division commander. Clifton Cates, a division commander, was at Belleau Wood. He was on the previous slide as well. Major General Rocky, an XO at Belleau Wood. And probably more famous than some of these other gentlemen is Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith, who was the commander of the expeditionary force that landed at Iwo Jima. And all of these men, again, veterans of Belleau Wood. And in kind of in conclusion, here's the famous Devil Dog Fountain, being with General Bob Neller, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps when this picture was taken in 2018. I don't think he didn't get to re-enlist, but he distinguished himself in his career, that's for sure, being the commandant of the Marine Corps. Hopefully, it's given him good health. But this is kind of concludes my presentation. Any questions?
That was great, Bill. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions?
Not a question as much as a comment. Thank you very much for that, especially the last few slides showing the leadership coming from
Hmm.
Belleau Wood, extending well into the 50s.
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Anybody else? Even as an Army spouse, I appreciated that presentation. Uh, all right. We did, a couple of people are in the chat room saying excellent presentation. Um,
Great.
and it was so thorough, and very complimentary with the pictures with it versus the just the content. So thank you very much. One reminder, we will be having the Eastern chapter will be having a Zoom meeting tomorrow. The topic is civilian internment in the British Empire during World War One. Um, and it's presented by Dr. Stephen Manns from Aston University, Birmingham, United Kingdom. So that should be interesting as well. And if you're looking for the link for that, that will be in the reminder email that you got today, which had this link as well. Again, thank you so much for your time, Bill, and look forward to hearing more from you as you continue your research.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to conclude the meeting and wish everybody a safe weekend. I'm here in Alabama. I will be hunkered down in my storm shelter. But I hopefully will still be at the meeting tomorrow. All right, thanks a lot and have a great evening.
Okay, you too.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye bye.